Admit it, we've all fantasized about slamming our resignation letter on our boss's desks, fleeing the city, and riding off into the sunset. But as tantalizing as it seems to leave the pressures of modern cities behind, you may quickly find your idyllic countryside destination isn't quite what you'd imagined, and that many rural residents are trying to run the other way. In this final episode of Gen Taiwan, we find out whether the grass truly is greener on the other side of the urban-rural divide.
Located on the eastern edge of Taiwan, Chaobin Township is the perfect escape from the hustle of Taipei City. But trouble brews underneath the town's idyllic charms. Chaobin Township is facing a population crisis.
年轻人还得工作啊，工作回来要专门生小孩，要专门买房子。阿公阿嬷如果在的话，还是偶尔会回来。如果阿公阿嬷不在了，就没有回来了。
In a bid to attract young Taiwanese to visit and stay, the town went through a makeover. But some locals are not impressed.
原件都是复制别的地方，或是哪里的成功案例复制到这个地方的时候，那这个地方的真实样貌，其实它就会慢慢的被洗掉。那洗掉了之后，它是不是就不会有它的地方特色？我觉得这个很可惜。
我觉得，创生可能不见得是要把它变得很好看，因为很好看吸引的还是观光客啊。所以我觉得，应该是要让它变得增加一些粘性。
Vice meets some young Taiwanese who have moved to rural towns and are remaking it in their own ways.
就是有点像大家一起做白日梦，然后大家一起把这个白日梦实现。我觉得在长滨就是有这种可能性，但是以前在都市不敢想象这件事情。
对，
Chaobin Township sits on the eastern coast of Taidong in Taiwan. More than a decade ago, the town had some 8,000 people. In 2019, that figure was slightly over 7,000. 23% of the population is above the age of 65. It's an aging town.
你真正要回来上班的话，这边第一个那个就业机会也不多啊。然后薪水又不是很多，你说要攜家带眷回来吗？
很难。
对呀，因为薪水少嘛，你工作机会又不多。那你说做农嘛，其实做农这边好像也没有什么高经济的农作，都稻田。
Taiwan is rapidly aging. In 2021, people aged 65 years and above made up some 17% of the population, while birth rates continue to decline. This situation is worse in remote towns like Chaobin.
我们在这边经营的一间餐厅叫做海边小屋。那其实我们经营海边小屋最一开始的时候，我们好像没有设定它一定是一间餐厅。只是觉得想要经营这个空间，然后以比尔他在台北有开过餐厅的经验，还有我自己很爱吃，还有对一些食物比较敏感，然后所以我们就想说，说不定可以用吃这个角度来出发，作为海边小屋跟大家见面的一个方式。
After spending time working on a farm in Australia, both Mia and Bill decided to leave Taipei City for the countryside in 2021.
他有一天就跟我讲说，他想要去一个乡村过生活，然后我就觉得乡村不太可能。
然后，但是这个地方其实也是我们意外自己找到的地方。一开始来这里就觉得哇，一片荒野，就很有想象空间，好像房东没有给我们任何的设限，就觉得我们没有在 台东生活过，所以不太清楚台东的店是怎么的，客人到底是哪来的，就是凭着一股就是不知道哪来的
勇气，
勇气就想说试试看好了，
对，
不行再说。我觉得我们的地点虽然比较好像感觉有点偏僻，但其实又在主要干道附近，所以其实大家还蛮容易，就是那种自然流量的客人还是有的。所以我觉得倒是还好哎，从去年9月一开幕就有点吓到，想说居然大家从 Google 就找到我们就来了。
那就是跟都市比起来，像以前在都市大部分就是工作、下班回家睡觉。可是在这里就是比较，他们说比较 chill， 就是比较悠闲放松一点。
In 2019, Taiwan's government launched a national plan for regional revitalization to address issues of aging demographics and population imbalances. Since then, various initiatives have sprouted across Taiwan. Similarly, Jiangbin heeded the call and embarked on a facade makeover, hoping to attract younger Taiwanese and tourists to boost the local economy. However, local Jiangbin resident Carrie is concerned that makeover projects like this might change the unique charm of Jiangbin.
是我们阿美族人帮在我们其实有给他一个名字叫做赏药，它其实是幅员辽阔的意思。但是为了观光的推动，他们取的名字叫金刚大道，我就觉得，就是也许未来，假设大家都真的那么需要基地要建水泥坊的时候，它可能会变得名副其实的金刚大道。但是我不太愿意看到那样的样子。我是台东的阿美族。然后其实是长滨石坑部落的孩子，那在这里出生，然后在这里读书，就是想要继续升学的话，就必须要离开，然后出去回来大概20年。我们会期望说，这个地方的发展是不是可以停留在我们小时候那个最纯粹的那个环境里面。
After returning home in 2016, Carrie now runs a bar and conducts workshops dedicated to preserving her indigenous heritage.
其实考察地会，其实一开始真的就只有烤肉、喝茶的一块农地。那部落的哥哥就想说，有吧台是不是有机会喝到部落特调在这个吧台上？所以他们就带了那个所谓的米卡农啊，或者是就是部落很习惯的那种调酒。我是不是来因应哥哥他们的需求，在这个地方做一点点属于我自己风格的调酒？
Carrie had initially applied to be part of Jiangbin's makeover project, but changed her mind after disagreeing with the project vision.
其实我们那时候听的说明会听起来还蛮美的，但是当那个就是接洽多了之后，发现我如果是业者，我觉得对我来说这是赚钱的一个方式。但是今天我是店家的时候，我又是在这里生活，我觉得那不是我想要走的路线。如果说什么老街改造啊，我比较希望是，如果真的很希望它是老街改造，那应该是老的那个东西到底是什么，它是应该要被留下，而不是只是一个形象。
昨天看的书哦，喜欢吗？喜欢，那要不要再挑一本？
可是我还没看完。
没看完，你还没看完哦。
Bookshop owner Eric Cao moved here in 2019. Originally from the southern city of Tainan, he was in search of his next destination in life.
悬一点就是我有脑中有梦过，就是我在开书店这样子，那时候就是一边卖书一边卖粥这样子，对，所以心中就一直有这画面，好几年了。后来觉得想要来长滨，我比较习惯到个地方都是用开店的方式在那边生活，所以我就想说，好像可以把那个画面落实， 所以我就觉得那就开书店好了，而且这边也没有书店啊，就觉得试试看在这边开书店可以创造什么火花这样子，结果就大大的超乎预期啊！好久不见，
哇，终于来到这里哦。
那你还好吗？因为我没有把握书店能够有我的收入，然后又能够付房租水电，所以我就必须要去外面工作。所以我的挑战第一关就是我要找到人帮我顾店。
Eric decided to hire temporary bookshop managers and provide them with accommodation. And by doing so, he hopes to attract younger visitors to this remote town.
通常来这边的人就是他想要来这边差不多 long stay 一段时间，可是他就住民宿什么，他可能开销会比较大。然后二者是住在店里面，他一方面节省房租，二方面他可以透过店去接触很多在地人或是流动的人，所以他的角色比较不是像观光，他会比较融入在地。
我觉得对于说，像我这些这样的学生，可能比较没有什么钱，那我想要出来玩的话，那或许待在这个地方，我可以用工作来换取住宿的话，其实是对我们是比较好的。平常是住在地下室那边，我觉得住在书店算是一个蛮好的体验，也是我一直以来都很想要的，做的事情。
这边就是大家共住的一个空间，这边是厨房。就是这边主要是会有一些，我自己也住在这边啦，然后有一些暂时想要在这边居住的人可以住在这边。那有3个房间，那这边各有2个房间。目前是一个艺术家驻村在这边，那后面这边是我的房间这样子。那我会在这边工作。我觉得我开书店，透过打工换宿的方式，就引入一些人，可以来先认识这个地方，或者是进而住下来这样子。像确实是有人陆续因为来这边换宿，然后住到我家，像这样的地方啊，先解决住的问题是蛮重要的。很多人说到那个乡村找不到工作这样子，其实工作是蛮多的，因为我们真的蛮缺人的。那反而是住的地方就是不够充足，所以来的人如果能够先有安稳的住的地方，那工作譬如说学校啊，或者是有很多机构啊，或者是一些农务的工作啊，像这边也比较流行的是民宿的话，那民宿的工作也都蛮需要人的，所以我觉得就是透过让大家安稳的住下来，然后年轻人有机会回来去体验这样子。
Newcomers to the countryside are now slowly building their own community. Cafe owners Mia and Bill are back today to help in a community sailing project with a boat made locally.
尤其是长滨这个地方，有趣的人事物都很多。活动的话，像长滨就附近有很多自发的活动，比如说造船啊、种稻啊这些，就是太有趣了，所以。如果要回都市，我们可能回不去。这边整体环境好像对新移民还蛮友善。
主要应该也是，就是比较老的新移民，例如像苏州的耀威，就是他其实蛮照顾新到的新移民的，所以因为这样子会让刚搬来这边什么都不清楚的时候会
比较轻松，
比较有人可以问，然后也有一些在地的阿姨们，他们其实也蛮照顾我们这些新移民小朋友，所以他们都会给我们非常多的关怀跟资源。对，我觉得这一块会让我们很想要继续留在这边。
那我会更希望年轻的人回来，跟中段的这些长辈们，他们可以回来，是因为他有太多的记忆是在他们身上，因为我们其实是跟不上的。那如果今天我们希望可以丰富长滨，那这一段的人如果可以回来，其实是他可以让长滨长出更多过去长辈的生活智慧，然后让年轻人可以用他们的方式去转译。我觉得是一个可以好好发展的，不管是你要用地方创生或者是什么样的方式都可以。但是我相信，当我们可以用很好的方式去转译的时候，它其实在这个地方可以拥有自己一个很棒的市场。
To discuss that episode and the urban-rural divide in Taiwan and in other parts of the world, we're joined by our three guests. First of all, we have Laureen Zhang, who's from Pingdong County in southern Taiwan, now living in Taipei and working for a global bank. We have Shi Jueying, originally from rural Jianghua County in central Taiwan, working in the electric vehicle industry, and Wang Tingqi, originally from Taiwan's outlying island of Jinmen, currently based in Taipei working in the creative industry. First of all, I want to ask you, you're all from countryside, relatively countryside areas. Can you describe a little bit what it's like to grow up in an area like that in Taiwan?
So I grew up in Jinmen, Kinmen, and it's not just rural. Historically, it was also a battle zone. And so it was really simple. Roads were not paved. You see soldiers every day, everywhere. That was how I grew up, and very much cut from the mainland of Taiwan. So we couldn't get the radio of Taiwan. TV channel was restricted to just one channel. I don't know if people can share the same experience, but basically, yes, when I came to Taiwan, eventually people were surprised that we didn't live in the cave.
I think from my experience, I had some kind of culture shock when I moved to Taipei, from Jianghua. So I found that people in Taipei, especially my classmates, are mostly from Taipei. I would say that they are more like it's very normal in their life that they will go to karaoke and doing some like shopping and very big malls, but that's not something that we would do in countryside. That our lives are pretty simple.
So I'm actually from Pingdong City, so people would say that's the most urbanized area of Pingdong, but even that, we will be, like playing with neighbors. Like we will actually be running, playing like toy cars or like biking, and then just hanging around with the kids in the neighborhood. But when I grew up and came to Taipei, and like a lot of people, they don't know their neighbors.
All of you mentioned that you knew your neighbors, and that kind of friendly relationship with your neighbors is something that's really key to kind of quieter areas of Taiwan. That sounds quite nice, doesn't it? What made you want to leave those areas eventually and come to a bigger city? What were the factors that pushed you away?
Well, very much like the video said, there weren't colleges in Jinmen back then, so I had no choice but to leave. Everyone had to leave. My parents, my great-grandparents, maybe not my great-grandparents' generations, but from my parents' generation, they had to leave if they want to advance their studies. So I did, like everyone did.
The reason I think most of us, we think that Taipei is a better place if you want to pursue like better job or better career development. Taipei would be the choice too.
So I go to Kaohsiung, and then I go to the universities in Taipei because that's where all the talented, the competent students are, and where I can study my interest studies, and they have the good professors, the academic resources. Yeah, so eventually we do come northbound,
Now, one of our guests, Tingqi, you went one step further. You went all the way to New York in the US to study and then worked there eventually. But then the interesting part of your story is that you moved back from New York to Jinmen. Tell us a little bit about your story and what the factors were and your decisions there.
Sure, actually, so I went to New York for graduate studies, and I stayed to work there. Stayed there actually for 6 years on and off together. And eventually I decided to move back for personal reasons. And it wasn't a bad decision, actually. Of course, I have my doubts, but I actually love Jinmen. There's no reason why not to get close to it. So I came back to Taiwan, stayed in Taipei for 2 years, and very quickly I knew that I wanted to go back to Jinmen because I wanted to start my own projects there. And so I went and I stayed for 4 years there.
And why did you eventually again leave Jinmen after those 4 years?
It's very complicated. I would say that you relocate not just for project opportunities. Anyone who you go to start a new life in a place. And me, as someone who's originally from there are a lot more complicated things you have to deal with. There's a countercultural shock for me. And for my parents too, they couldn't quite accept an Americanized daughter coming back home saying no and disagreeing with them all the time. So there were conflicts all the time. This is very much personal experience. I can't speak for everyone, but for me, personally and professionally, I ran into a lot of setbacks.
Now, Jing, you also moved back home for a period of time as well. Can you tell us what the reason was for your moving back and what the experience was like there?
The reason I moved back is because of my father's health issue. And so my mom, she wants me to move back and to take care of the family. So I found a job that I can go back to hometown. But honestly speaking, that the job was more like a compromise choice. The salary is okay, but I don't really like the job scope, and also the industry. I don't really see the future. So after a year, and also my dad's situation is getting stable, so I found another job and I escaped back to Taipei.
I want to talk a little bit about family connections and what impact that has on these decisions. When you were leaving your hometowns, were your family trying to influence you to stay at all? Was that something that they wanted? Did your parents want you to be in the area, or were they encouraging you to leave?
I'm living in a big family, so my family, the connection is quite close. But when we were back in our high school, when we say that we want to go to Taipei to pursue our college life, nobody would say no. So for the first 10 years, people would ask, "Are you coming back? It's better. It's a better life living in Middle Taiwan." But now people don't ask that. People know that we will not go back.
I have my parents and my relatives in my family. Many of them are teachers who are in the military or in the police. They have stable government jobs. They will always be like, "Hey, you finished your study? Do you want to try a teacher training program? You could eventually move back to Pingtung, and then with the same salary, it was terrible living in Taipei, but you could live like a queen in Pingtung. Do you want to try?" And I'll be like, "No, I did try the teacher training program, but it was so dull and it's so predictable."
Is there a difference, do you think, between people who grew up in cities and then moved to the countryside, relative to people who grew up in the countryside, moved away and then came back? What are the differences in the difficulties that those people face?
Yeah.
And do you think people idealize the countryside?
Yes, idealize. Well, first of all, I think absolutely, it's just the same. If you move from one place to another, that place which you go to always looks better. So it works that way too. If you grow up in the rural area, you leave, you come back, you're going back to the, ground zero. So it's nothing romantic there for many people. The other way around, not so much, you go from a busy, bustling city to the romantic countryside. It is very different. It's very much like on a vacation forever. And so you have much less to worry about. You don't need to, the expat mindset. You are less restrained socially. You can be freer. That applies to people going from the city to the countryside too. Whereas if you go back home from the city, you have been transformed and you bring that new you back to a place where that expects you to be the same. And you can imagine that conflict you have to face with your immediate family and your surroundings.
Yeah, and I would say there is more complications emotionally when we return to our hometown, because you will have the family's expectations of, okay, you now earn more, or maybe you're able to come back. Maybe you should be the caretaker of the family. If I happen to be the one who decide to come back, then the weight of the family caring will be on my shoulder. But maybe a lot of young people my age would have this complicated relationship with our parents, because there's the generational gap of how we see things, how we interpret things. So it's just hard to be in the same town as your parents, as your old relatives.
Yes.
Yeah, I also want to add that just as in the beginning James mentioned, there's a nice sense of community in these rural areas, but that can be, that can work the other way too. It's a community that could, give you too much pressure. You need to respect that community, and that fabric you don't always fit in. And so what do you do about that? So it's both good and bad. Yeah.
And then a final question for all three of you, which is that you're all currently living in cities. What do you think it would take for you to move back once again, in your case, to your hometown?
I think eventually it would again, if my parents' health condition, there's something wrong, but I hope not. So yeah, family responsibility would be the reason that I moved back.
Would that be the only reason, do you think?
So far, yes.
And Lorene, what do you reckon?
I think for me, job opportunity. To be able to pay relatively well. I'm not saying I should get paid exactly the same amount, but it should be able to afford me living a relatively good quality of life in Pingdong and doing a job where I can, demonstrate my skills, my capability. But so far, I don't see that kind of job in Pingdong. So.
I'm not sure I have a simple answer to that. That's actually a question that I ask myself daily since I left. And I say that because I went for the cultural inspiration and that flame is still in me. But I left because of the reality, economic reality and social reality, and that's still true. And so I guess if economically I can find a way to sustain myself while doing what I'm passionate about, I would still consider going back.
Thank you so much to all our guests for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this. It's been a really, really wonderful conversation. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for this final episode of Gen Taiwan. You can see all the full episodes on social media, our website, and the TaiwanPlus app.